A curtain opens for us to see a man on stage in a traditional black and white display. He doesn't have normal legs, walking on the parts where his knees should be. He starts to read a poem about the fallen angel, Abaddon. At first, he made his place in the depths of hell, but eventually he clawed his way to the land of men. There he was able to fall in love with a woman who tragically lost her life at some point. Thus Abaddon yelled out to heaven and awakened God. This made God drag him back to his pit. Soon, the vultures ate the one he loved until only her bones and heart were left. While God slept, the heart revived with the devil's needle inside. The man ends the poem by reading, "There is a tear in the heart where the devil roams." The audience applauds upon the poem's conclusion. Afterward, we change to a more modern setting. The first thing we see is a young girl's eyes. There are also two adults there, lying on the floor for a curious reason. The woman says just one word, Maggie. The unsettling act that's taking place in the room is finally shown. Another girl is sitting on top of the man and stabs him repeatedly with a tool. No one seems to be capable of stopping her. Once she stops, she walks over to the first girl we saw to give her the tool. The woman tells Maggie not to do it, but the first girl, perhaps she's Maggie, sits on the woman and is about to do what the other girl was doing to the man. We don't get to see it though, because the scene cuts to reveal the title of the film. We see a young lady walking outside. She approaches a store, where she sees an older man sitting asleep near the entrance. She feels the need to place a stuffed toy in his hand before she enters the store. A statuette of Christ is in there, which she has to turn around to not face her. In a few seconds, we see the reason she did this was to not be seen by him as she steals an apple. Soon a woman enters who wears a lot of makeup like it's Halloween, and greets the girl with the name Eve. She says she could prepare Eve's hair like the latter likes it at another time. The girl simply smiles at her. When the woman leaves, a man wearing a top hat enters the store, prompting Eve to get at least slightly nervous. He buys a large pair of scissors for 67 cents. Heading over to Eve, the man advises her to be careful, or he might clip her fingers. Perhaps he knows of the apple she stole, or he may know her to be a thief in general. While the cashier isn't looking, Eve cuts the hand of a doll for some twisted reason. After she leaves the store, she enters a carnival, where three young males immediately take notice of the girl. Some people there are decorated with grotesque makeup. We see an introductory montage taking place. The man with the top hat is there. With the conclusion of the montage, we see Eve standing on stage in an angel costume. Two people beside her start gesturing whilst she starts singing. Alas, it doesn't seem like the people care about her performance. Elsewhere in the carnival, a woman yells that people could get 3 throws for a nickel. A man with a bow tie approaches her area and asks a man there what the scam is with this one. The other man, 7, says there is no scam. The woman, whose name is Maggie, tells him to pay a nickel to find out. But he says he didn't get this far playing the fool. Following this, we see the man with the top hat giving his performance. He raises his arms high and talks loudly to God. His soul is seated with troubles, he says. God has placed him in dark places. As he talks, Maggie says, everyone is there for Mr. Tips. He uses those huge scissors he bought disturbingly for his show, and this makes the spectators happy. At night, 5 ladies sit by a fire, with one of them playing a guitar. She is Rocky, getting told by Maggie that the former plays very well. Once they talk about Mr. Tips, Rocky says his talent is not magic, he is kissing the devil. Soon Rocky gifts Maggie with her guitar, saying she has 3 others. Maggie starts to strum it, yet she can't produce the kind of music Rocky can. Moving along, our attention is brought to a tent with 2 fires burning beside it. Eve enters it, and Tips is the one who resides within. He tells her it's time to fix the tips, whatever that means. He tells Eve the devil knows she can keep a secret. He starts telling a story of how when he was a boy, he loved the circus. Every summer, his mom would give him 5 pennies to see the show under the big top. He speaks of the strong man, the ladies riding the elephants, and the acrobats who flew through the air. Tips has seen a lot in his days in the circuses, including seeing a man drop to his demise and someone's arm being eaten by a lion. But he longed to see something different. It was to escape from his mother's tears and his father's fists. Afterward, Tips opens a box to reveal a heart with a needle in it. We should recall what this is from the story in the introduction. He says he found it in a small tent and mentions a man named Broken Cane, who performed sickening acts. As he talks, he takes the needle out of the heart. Tips wonders how the man did what he did. He had to know, so he watched him until Cain told him the story of Abaddon and the magic heart. Later, Tips took his magic, which allowed him to make a pact with darkness. He says, when one dances with the devil, one has to be quick about it. Thus he sings a lullaby to keep the heavens asleep. Tips states the same poem the performer at the beginning of the film did. Turning to Eve, he says it's a powerful psalm. He also warns her not to get any ideas because he has a deal with the devil. Eve watches him with some amount of fear and Tips tells her not to say anything to anyone. The next scene has 4 people playing poker. The one with the indentation on his forehead is Ned. One of the players puts down a straight, causing Ned to say it's a hard hand to beat. 7 is among them, putting down a straight flush. Due to the unlikeliness of such a strong hand, the man who had a straight accuses 7 of cheating. Ned defends Seven by saying he did not cheat, but the accuser isn't buying it. He says Seven goes home with his earnings every night. A fourth player there calls the accuser a clown and gets punched for it. Therefore, a fight ensues, which results in a few drops of life liquid landing on Seven's face. For some reason, he starts losing his mind because of it. Ned calls out to Maggie and she rushes in to punch one of the fighters. After that, she tends to Seven, telling him he's okay. The scene changes to show the woods. A man in a soldier's uniform runs to another one lying near a tree. He tells the one who ran to him to sever his injured arm. The one he tells this to is none other than Seven, who gives the bad news of not having morphine. However, the wounded man says he will lose his life if his arm stays with him. Those words prompt Seven to saw off the arm. Unfortunately, the soldier gets shot to his demise, making the severing unnecessary. With that, Seven wakes up scared from this nightmare beside Maggie and Eve. We learn they are a family. We see Maggie at a stream, where she finds the tiny shoe of a child in the water. She looks at it for a few seconds prior to letting it go. Moving along, the family rides in a car to their next destination, as they are traveling performers. At a stopping point, Eve shaves her father, Seven, with scissors. He says he's reading a book about early Christians. He does not like them, but he guesses he's reading the book for comedy. He says there was an early group of Christians called the Gnostics, who thought the devil was telling the truth, whereas God was the liar. Maggie remarks, God is exactly that. Seven continues by saying that when the devil brought the apple to their Eve, he smilingly looks at their daughter. He brought her knowledge and good. The Gnostics also thought the world was upside down. If they stood on their heads, it would be right side up. All Maggie says is she likes those Christians. In the next scene, the family is inside the house of the man we saw earlier. Seven and Eve sit at his dinner table whilst Maggie brings in the food. She puts a blindfold over Seven for a reason unknown. Calling out to his wife, the homeowner does not get an answer. Getting nervous, he says the farm was failing. However, Maggie tells him he did not merely take the farm, he took a little piece of all of them and made the world a little more empty. Even more nervous now, the man says he has very nice things he can give them. Suddenly, Maggie slams him with a frying pan several times to his demise. Eve doesn't mind it and starts eating like it happens regularly. We come to understand this is the reason why Seven was blindfolded, to not witness the violence that could trigger his war-induced trauma. Later, we see the homeowner's lifeless wife lying on the floor while Maggie is cleaning near her. She is kind enough to leave a flower on the deceased lady. Eve takes a photo of the destroyed man. A newspaper flies at us, saying the carnival is coming to town. We see a montage of its performances mixed with the family in another house, where Eve takes a photo of another lifeless man. A second newspaper informs us that a crooked judge got beheaded. Eve takes more photos, and a house has to burn down. Along their traveling journey, the family arrives at a house that offers 75 cents for a room per night. Maggie talks to the homeowner, who tells her it's 75 cents per person, but Maggie says the sign says it's 75 cents per night. The homeowner does not argue with this. She simply adds that it's per person. Maggie keeps opposing her, saying her words contradict the sign. This prompts the woman to tell Maggie the sum she will have to pay, $2.25. Apparently, this is a price too high for Maggie, so she goes back in the car. At night, the family sits near a fire outside, and Maggie practices playing the guitar Rocky gave her. She asks if they will get invited to the Buffalo Horror Show. Seven replies they don't do this because they care. They do this to travel. Yet Maggie thinks their daughter has something very special. Soon, she says she has a toothache. Thus, Seven looks in her mouth and says she has a rogue tooth. Maggie wants him to remove it, which makes him say he was a country doctor, not a dentist. Despite what he was, she still wants the tooth to be removed. The next thing we see is Seven holding a tool to her tooth while wearing a blindfold. The second strike from a hatchet gets the tooth to fall out. We see a deceased person who has fused with the earth on a battlefield. We have entered Seven's past again during the war. This time, there is a red cross on his helmet to signify he's a medic. He hides behind a fence of rocks and witnesses the enemy gun down a comrade. This causes Seven to start running away, but the enemy runs behind him to shoot at Seven. Due to this, the man wakes up. Afterward, Maggie finds another small shoe outside. Once Seven draws near, she tells him Eve should meet her siblings. She also says she has no problem with Seven's first life. Furthermore, she considers it their other children's curse, that they left him for what happened in the war. Subsequently, we see Eve sitting in the car with her dad. She holds a doll she wants to apply scissors to. Her dad looks at it and says she isn't doing it right. She should not cut through a bone, he says, but through a joint. It's where the ligaments and tendons hold the bones together. Therefore, Eve cuts the doll's arm where the elbow would be. At a different time, the family arrives at a big house. They end up sleeping in its barn on the hay until a man with a pitchfork wakes them up. Surprisingly, he isn't hostile towards them. He introduces himself as Eric, instead of attacking the uninvited guests. We see he has invited the family inside his house, where they get warm by the fire. Eric talks of the Great War, calling it terrible with a lot of fear. Seven tells him he was in that war. Eric says when he lost his brother, he felt very alone, so he left his motherland for America. yet wonders for what because in this country, he is also alone. Being among company now, however, brings him delight. Out of nowhere, Eve starts to sing, only to soon get interrupted by Eric. He says it's a lovely melody that reminds him of a song his mother sang to him. It prompts him to start singing in his language, which is Norwegian. Since Eric is singing with closed eyes, Maggie uses this opportunity to collect a fireplace poker. She stands behind the singing man whilst her daughter stands behind Seven to cover his eyes. Thus, Maggie impales Eric to his instant demise. She tells her husband she did it due to Eric being German, Seven's enemies during the war. Correcting her, Seven says the man she just ended was Norwegian. Maggie asks if that is a kind of German and he says it's close. Eve does what she always does. Once the family brings a person to their demise, she takes a photo of the corpse. Afterward, the family continues to ride until a problem with the car presents itself. Maggie advises them to go to the house they recently passed on the road, and they start doing it. Upon arriving there, Seven speaks to the man of the house. He talks respectfully to him, explaining the family's situation. But the homeowner says there is a farmer about 5 miles down the road who could help them. Of course, Seven considers it problematic to walk 5 miles there and back. It would sum up to a miserable 10-mile walk in the cold. To avoid doing that, Seven asks if he could take a small slice of the man's garden hose to fix his car trouble. He even says he will pay double for what it's worth. Yet this doesn't get the man to comply, for he says the farmer's name is Jackson, who should help them better. The next thing we see is the family inside the house, where the man is now deceased along with a woman. Maggie plays her guitar while singing. It is a serene song, contrasting quite strongly with the crime they committed. Later, Maggie learns from Seven that someone stole the spare tire. Interestingly, she says there is a special place in hell for thieves, and she runs it. We watch Eve play the piano. She sees a doll on top of it, which she takes to look at. In the meantime, Maggie carefully checks the rooms of the house. Opening one door, she finds a tuxedo. The doll Eve took suddenly gets its head cut off. Each member of the family is alone, engaged in their own doing. Seven is in a room, checking it carefully because he heard a sound. As he looks at himself in a mirror, someone strikes him with an axe from behind, causing the mirror to shatter on the floor. His family hears it, and Maggie enters the room wearing the tuxedo she found. She sees her husband lying there, while we see the lady with the axe standing near the door. She attacks Maggie next. When she keeps hacking at her, Maggie collects a shard of mirror to stab her attacker with it. At this moment, we observe the doll in a destroyed state. Eve enters the room to see the chaos on the floor. It makes her drive their car to the carnival, where we see its performers practicing their acts. Mr. Tips displays his usual performance with the scissors. Soon Eve returns to the room in the house where her parents lie and places a box near her father. She opens it to reveal the heart with the needle in it, before using the needle to sew her dad's wounded head. Once Eve puts her mom's severed hand to her arm, Maggie says her mother took her brother's life due to him losing his shoe. But she is the one who lost his shoe. Back at the carnival, Eve sings again with her fixed parents beside her. Seven takes Maggie's hand, and perhaps by mistake, rips it off. After he falls back, the crowd cheers at last. Maggie's leg breaks. Seeing this newness, Mr. Tips can't believe it. Maggie smiles as she holds her dislocated leg in the air. The family finally gets the applause they never got. However, Tips does not like this, for he probably knows what it means. Elsewhere, Eve hears a voice asking her how it feels to hold the thread between heaven and hell. In a short time, the speaker reveals himself to be Tips, saying Eve cut off more than she can sew. She is currently stitching her doll. The man goes on to say it takes more than a good stitch to keep the light asleep. Eve has to say the spell, he tells her. Yet he remembers the girl can't speak. He wants her to give back what she stole, but the dangerous girl responds by holding scissors to his head, prompting him to say the devil got a new dance partner. The man warns her not to step on his toes. The next scene has Eve with her parents. Somehow they have caught the thief who stole the spare tire. Seven says it will cost her an arm and a leg. After Eve takes the thief's life, we see Maggie in her mutilated state. Her daughter starts sawing off her arm at the elbow so she can sew the arm of the thief to her. In the process of Eve's sewing, Maggie asks her if she felt like she was on a roller coaster when she assassinated the woman. She describes the feeling of being on such a ride, and asks Eve if it felt like that. She is proud of her daughter for having done it. At the carnival, a man tells Seven they are expecting a big crowd today. He heard Seven's show is great and he has new magic, which he cannot wait to see. We observe Eve combing her father's hair, but the man isn't himself. She has to bring a glass of milk to his mouth for him to drink it. She also puts her doll in his hands. Once the girl leaves with her mom, Seven stares ahead in a vegetative manner. Maggie struggles to walk as Eve supports her. Soon she tells her daughter her hand does not look good, therefore she will need a new one quickly. We see how grotesque her hand is. Moving onward, the duo visits Rocky, who's playing her guitar. She says she likes what she hears of their show and that it's nasty. Additionally, Rocky says Tips rotted because he tangled with the devil. Afterward, a man visits the vegetative Seven to start talking to him. Since he isn't responding, the visitor helps himself by drinking Seven's milk. What's worse is that he takes the performer's wallet. Alas, Seven doesn't do anything to stop him. He remembers his time during the war instead. He sees a tank approaching, so he runs away to hide behind the rock fence, where one of his comrades is suffering. He asks for his god and his mom before attempting to crawl away. This makes Seven grab him to sever the soldier's head. The act covers him with life liquid and brings him to gasp in horror. This is very likely the circumstance that traumatized him to the point of not being able to see life liquid ever again. We see Eve's performance with her parents. Seven is wearing his blindfold now due to their presentation no longer being nonviolent. Shortly after Seven takes Maggie's hand, it falls off. When Eve picks it up, the audience applauds. Following this, we get another montage of the family engaging in more of their shows. A newspaper flies at us to state the gruesome family is doing exceptionally well. A second newspaper states that more victims were found with missing limbs. Later, we see Tips with rotted skin, and his hand has suffered profoundly from the disease. We should recall Maggie mentioning a place called the Buffalo Horror Show. Well, it seems like the family has been invited to this prestigious carnival. While Seven stands alone in a room, Tips draws near to ask the vegetative man if anyone is home. Showing Seven his hand, Tips says Eve did that to him, but he claims he can fix it with one little spell. Though Eve can do it too, her problem is she can't speak. Thus Tips speaks the rhythmic spell. Once he leaves, we see Seven mouthing something to himself. Perhaps it's the spell. Maggie comes to Rocky and wants to give the guitar back because her ruined hand won't allow her to play it properly. Yet Rocky doesn't want to take it. Subsequently, Maggie walks over to a door with small shoes on its handle. She takes them off to look at them. At a different time, Eve enters a room where her parents lie on the floor. Her mother tells her they are rotten. She also says the devil took the best of them and left them broken. Not wanting to be the devil's puppet, Maggie tells her daughter to end it. She wants no more of the magic. Surprisingly, Seven starts to quietly say the spell Tips told him. In the next scene, Eve walks inside a hallway wearing her angel wings. She keeps walking until she enters the stage. On it, she sings the spell she heard her father speak. A person appears beside her with a male body, but with the head of Maggie. The duet finishes singing the rhyme together.